Well, hello everyone. I hope you're doing okay on this, very, shall we say, concerning, to put it mildly, morning. I'm, as you can see, on location here, visiting my brother in San Diego. We just arrived yesterday, so I'm recording this Saturday morning, West Coast time in the U.S. Around 10 a.m. Just to kind of timestamp this, so these are obviously extremely kinetic events, and I don't. Hopefully, I can add a bit of analysis and insight that is valuable. There's a lot of information out there, obviously, on this, so I'm going to try to keep this short and try to. I mean, for me, the one of the top line stories here is I think I would say most analysts would be probably pretty surprised by the scope of this. One, uh, all indications, I was pretty confident because the kind of, when the U.S. war machine over the last several months has been kind of positioning and ratcheting into it's kind of like an engine once it's propulsing forward. It was almost inevitable there was going to be some sort of strike, which doesn't make, I mean, of course, that's still illegal, but I mean, just by the logic of this kind of Pentagon ramp up. But that said, I think the scope is surprising, and yeah, I mean, when I got up this morning and horribly habit-wise looked at my phone, and as I started to kind of read through the scope of this, the declaration of an intention for regime change, um, and I think we're seeing now with the initial first wave of the Iranian response, and again, this could be, they could declare a ceasefire tomorrow. So I'm not trying to say this is inevitable, but if things move in the direction they are, it looks like Iran, their strategy, because I think, the U.S. had a menu of, President Trump would be given a menu of options. And this, I would imagine, was probably, in terms of the, expansiveness and aggressiveness, was at the kind of furthest end of that spectrum. And Iran, I'm sure, had prepared a menu of retaliatory options. And what from my guess, this is probably, again, in terms of their most extreme. And that is because, in his infinite wisdom, President Trump just comes right out and says the goal is to topple the regime. And I think that's going to really shape how they respond to this. In that, if their only way, if their back is to the corner, they're going to start taking very extreme measures. And it seems that in terms of what they are trying to do now is make it clear that they will no longer tolerate or let Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, certainly the much bigger country of Saudi Arabia, to function as kind of U.S. proxies in the region. Just as much as everyone likes to point out the kind of proxies of Hezbollah, and that Iran deploys in different parts of the Middle East, and most notably in Lebanon. Certainly Iran, in the Iranian view of the world, if we take their perspective of the regime and the government, at least, Qatar and UAE and Bahrain and these countries, certainly Saudi Arabia, they view very similarly. These regimes are kleptocracies, very repressive, often rampant abuses of the population, and so forth, right? A lot of these countries have massive immigrant populations. So these are not, these regimes kind of function as military proxies for the United States, providing them bases. Also, they're a significant supporter of, supplier of cash. The Gulf states have given huge amounts of money to Trump. So what we're seeing in the Iranian response is that they are viewing not just military bases there, but even, to some extent, these regimes themselves, which, again, are deceptively stable. Again, they're standing, they're built, on a kind of a castle of sand, shall we say. And so I think what we're seeing from Iran is, yeah, I mean, again, maybe I'm sure different people would have different views, but I think this is like a pretty maximal in terms of hitting Qatar, Bahrain. I think they've hit inside Saudi Arabia, above and beyond any sort of, obviously there have been some missiles fired at Israel, which, Israel is one of the countries attacking Iran, so I guess that's a little bit more straightforward. But the Iran, I think, is saying, okay, if we're going to do this, like, let's, because I think you want to spur an uprising in Iran. I think their response is, well, I think we're going to try to spur an uprising in the Gulf states. That seems to be, perhaps because again, these regimes are not bastions of adoration and popularity, with their publics in many cases. So yeah, this is, again, this could all end very soon. Everyone could, but it seems that the initial salvo and counter salvo is setting us up for a much wider and perhaps a longer conflagration. Iran, if they do end up killing, sizable number of U.S. servicemen and women, that will put this in an entirely different dimension. But I think what's strange to me, and this goes back to some of the videos I recorded after our last go around with Iran, is that when you can say regime change all you want, but I mean, the notion that if you immediately after multiple times bombing countries, killing, hundreds, if not, multiple hundreds of civilians, it looks like today, tragically and horrifically, inexcusably, a girls' school was hit in Iran. I've seen that reported on several sites I respect, so I'm going to take that as given now, and that perhaps dozens of young girls were killed. And that speaks to this wider point that somehow you're going to bomb a country, and whatever, let's say the regime does fall, there's very little worlds where what emerges in the wake will be a friendly, or it will probably be more adversarial towards the United States. Most Iran, a lot of Iranians can believe two things. Perhaps they're not very happy with the Islamic Republic as constituted, but they also despise and very much the United States. And in that kind of climate, I'm not saying the regime's going to fall. It seems that they've weathered this first initial blow, as with the last time this was a kind of decapitation hit, and it seems like they're still able to coordinate and respond. But even if they do fall, I think there's zero chance we're going to send troops in there to dictate the outcome. And if you're not on the ground dictating the outcome, yeah, that's probably not going to, be a pro-U.S. Quote unquote. The U.S. loves the moderate, the Middle Eastern moderate. I mean, that's what we're going to find out, and I did talk about that in some of the last videos on Iran. And I think this is the game Iran is trying to play. Is you can call the leaders in UAE, who are also funding the bloody genocidal war in Sudan. They're funding that group. So I actually work with a Sudanese man, and he clued me in on that. And yeah, UAE is so, we can call these countries moderate, UAE and Qatar and, Bahrain and Saudi. I mean, they're moderate because they let us put our bases there, but they're not moderate in any sense of the word. And I think that's the, as much as there's dissatisfaction and anger at the regime in Iran, there's certainly a lot of anger and resentment bubbling across the Gulf at the regimes there. And so I think that's perhaps Iran. I mean, but that's a pretty big card. And so that will give us a sense of how Iran's viewing these initial attacks, right? Their response was quite, shall we say, high gravity. And I'm not saying, whatever again, I'm trying at least for now to I think this, it goes without stating, and, perhaps I should have said that from the front. Obviously, this is a wholly illegal war. It flatly violates the UN Charter, which was ratified by the U.S. Senate. So in an odd way, above and beyond just the constitutional issues, this is against U.S. law, as ratified treaties represent, per the Constitution, the highest law of the land. I think it is, some people say, what does that matter? And I think we can't give up on stating that fact. And every discussion of this war in the United States and elsewhere should call this the U.S. illegal war in Iran, the Israelis' the illegal war in Iran. This is because, we don't want to lose sight in this, because of course Iran's going to respond. I'm sure, lives will be lost. There will be tragedy in that. And then we don't want to just fall into these both sides, everyone's crazy here. And it's no, this was an illegal, under the UN Charter, not even with zero question. And I think that's an important, point to kind of frame all of this. But what I'm, as much here trying to do is give a sense of what my take is, that, again, the response by Iran indicates that they took the initial U.S.-Israeli strike to be a very maximal approach, because Iran is a very measured actor, and that's not in a complicated way, in a complementary way, but historically they're very precise in how they respond, and they very much kind of try to respond at first in what they see as a kind of equal or even somewhat de-escalatory hit. And some of the scenes I've seen out of Bahrain and other places of apartment buildings being hit and so forth, yeah, that really puts it on another level into my mind. We'll see. I could be wrong, or I hope I'm wrong. I really hope what I feel about where this is going is incorrect, but this is shaping up to be a conflagration of epic proportions. Because, again, the same issue with Iran. Like, whatever regimes are going to emerge, if any of these Gulf states fall, or if there's a mass uprising, just hypothetically, God knows what comes after that. If the Iranian regime falls, Iran is is obviously has a Shia, Persian kind of majority, but there's huge ethnic minorities in Iran. Kurds obviously are a large population there. Azeris, there's ethnic Afghans, and so forth, right? So there's a huge ethnic kind of mosaic in Iran, above and beyond kind of some of the political divisions around the Islamic Republic. And so it's 90 million people. It's a subcontinent-sized country, very difficult terrain. So I don't you can't you can't just like lob a bunch of missiles in and then be like regime change, which I mean seems to be the plan, which is yeah. And I'm just really surprised they did this jointly with Israel. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, like, I can't believe Israel would do this. Of course, like, Israel's been the one, that's been pushing for this for 20, 30 years. So that's another thing. I mean, Israel really didn't get what it wanted out of this first conflict, which made almost inevitable that we were probably going to see another one. And this is, but nonetheless, I'm surprised they decided, just to the extent that matters for like optics and kind of framing, doing this jointly with Israel is a massive change in dynamics. I could be wrong. I'm thinking back, like if we look back at the last 20 years, 30, 50 years in the Middle East, I can't think of, so where, any of my historians, diplomatic historians, war historians are out there, check me on this, but I can't think of any time the U.S. and Israel acted jointly in a Middle Eastern conflict. Like, Israel's done its strikes, the U.S. has done its strikes. Like, Israel didn't participate in the Iraq War, I don't think, directly. Like, I don't think they sent troops. I could be wrong. Maybe they did. Again, which, I don't think, like, I guess the U.S. did join the Israeli bombing campaign, but that was a little bit different, I thought. Israel kind of did that first, and then the U.S. came in at the very end. But in terms of, like, launching, like, a direct joint assault on a Middle Eastern country, I don't think that's happened. So, again, that, like, when you get in new terrain, it's very hard to see where this is going. And I can't remember Iran hitting I think some of the sites they've hit in the Gulf countries have been like places that aren't the actual sites of U.S. military bases, which, if true, I think is true. I think from the footage I've seen is pretty clearly not military installations, is also a significant upgrade in terms of escalation. So yeah, this could really get quite ugly. You could see a lot of oil kind of start to freeze up, and that oil quickly ricochets into other economic activity. There's already a huge, I mean, this is coming, at a highly inopportune time in terms of there's seems to be kind of slowly unraveling credit situation with private credit and private equity in the U.S. And if there's additional economic pressure from this conflict, that's the kind of thing where you have a lot of companies that are perhaps just on the edge of default. And one more thing, so we could see a lot of defaults come out of this. It could turn very dark in many knock-on effects that probably very often you can't consider all of them. So I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But that's kind of where I see things at, and the reasons why. So yeah, maybe I'll try to hop back in if I have a little more time. Heading off to visit my dad in a few days. It's a strange time. We arrived yesterday, and war is afoot. And yeah, I think this is shaking up to be a pretty massive region-wide conflagration that one could argue has been kind of building for the last 20-30 years, perhaps even since the end of the Cold War, and these new kinds of fault lines have been firmly etched in. We shall see, and I'll try to come back if there's any other kind of significant developments. So thanks for checking this out, and I hope everyone's doing well wherever you're at. All right, thanks.